Konai, our Nevada treasurer, to Elko. It's always good to have our constitutional officers roll through here and meet with the public. I know Zach has made a number of trips up here to Elko, and unfortunately it's been difficult during the pandemic time, but nonetheless it's good to see you. I'd like to also put a shout out to NNRDA because they had some involvement in this as well, and Scott, thanks for the coordination that you did, Scott Gavorski, on this. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nevada Treasurer Zach Konai.
Thank you very much, and thank you all so much for being here tonight. I'm Zach Konai. I have the pleasure of being your Nevada State Treasurer, and we're here to talk a little bit about an unprecedented opportunity. And before we do, I just want to recognize one of my favorite senators, Senator Pete Goicoechea, sitting right there in the audience. Senator, thanks so much for making the drive from Eureka to chat about this. So we find ourselves with an unprecedented opportunity, one that the state has never had before, and I expect one the state will never have again. We have $6.7 billion that's flown into the state through the American Rescue Plan. Now, that money is broken up into a lot of different buckets, and as the senator can tell you, it has a lot of different rules about it. But we wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about where that money came from and what we think we need to go through in order to spend it most effectively. And that's why I'm so glad that you're here today. I'm not going to talk a lot. This is a listening tour, right? So I really want to make sure that we can start listening and talking a little bit about ways that we can build the Nevada that you deserve. But a little bit on that 6.7. It's broken into 105 different buckets at the federal level. One of those buckets is the $2.7 billion we were wired at the state on June 4th. That was a pretty big wire to get on Friday afternoon, not going to lie to you. The second bucket is the $1.04 billion that are going to cities and counties and non-entitlement units around the state. That's mostly coming in tranches, so the first $500 million has already come in, the second $500 million will come in at the beginning of the year. Outside of that, there are 103 different buckets of funding, representing about $2.9 billion. And those range from a bucket for about $84,000 for elder abuse prevention, up into the K through 12 bucket, which comes in through ESSER funds, which is about $1.1 billion. Why am I sharing all this? It's because this is deeply complex, right? The amount of money coming in, the different pools, the way that it's going to move through the legislature, through the next session or a special session, the way it would move through the Interim Finance Committee is deeply complex. But that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about what this community needs. Because between the governor and myself and legislative leadership, when we put out the Every Nevadan Recovery Framework, which is sort of the principal document to talk about how we're going to spend this money, we did so in order to make sure that we had a process that was collaborative, effective, and transparent. And so every idea we talk about tonight, every idea we've talked about on this tour, every idea that's going to come up in every community around Nevada goes to one single place, NevadaRecovers.com. It's on the board. I'm going to say it about 100 times, but NevadaRecovers.com. Every idea, every survey, if you participate and help us fill out some of the boards in the back, all of that goes to NevadaRecovers.com. So at the end of this process, at the end of this listening tour, we're able to say each idea that came in, here's where it came from, here's the community it came from, here's the person it came from, here's how we can contact them for more information. But we can see how that idea grew, changed, was resourced, was attached to one of those 105 buckets of money, and how eventually it got done and got built. This is a different process than a process we've used in the past. It's different for two reasons. One, the federal government, through the White House and the Treasury, has made it very clear that they want this process to be intentional. An intentional process means you go out and you get data, and then you come up with a plan, and then you execute that plan, and then you look at what happened after you did what you said you were going to do. And number two, because it is simply so big, right? $6.7 billion represents 1.5 times our annual discretionary budget. It's a lot of money. And so we want to make sure we get it right? So all of the ideas that come in through NevadaRecovers.com move on to phase 2 of the process, which will start around October 15th. And during phase 2 of the process, we actually resource some of those ideas. Now, on NevadaRecovers.com, you can do 3 things. You can take our survey, which is just like the surveys that you might have seen coming into the room, or you might be filling out now. You can also do that online. You can request additional events, additional listening sessions. Perhaps you represent a group or an organization that could stand to hear some of this messaging directly. We're happy to do that. We're doing events all around the state. We said we're going to do 75 and 75 days. I think we'll probably exceed that by quite a bit, but here we are. And you can also put in ideas. And this is the thing I think that is unique to this process. There is a place that says submit an idea. And there we simply ask, tell us who you are, tell us what could be better in your community, and tell us how you would make that better. Now some of those ideas are coming in and they're really resourced, right? They're baked ideas. They're from 501c3s, from our legislative friends, from others that they know exactly what they want to do. Here's what we would do, here's the problem it would solve, here's how much money it would cost, here's how much time it would take. We're ready to go, we just need the money. And then other ideas, in other communities, it's things like, I don't have access to healthcare. I just don't have access to healthcare, I need it. I don't have access to the mental health services that my children need. I don't have access to food, right? They don't know that the right way to solve that might be a transportation issue, right? Moving them to services that already exist, building a new facility issue, a broadband issue so they could get access to help through the internet. They don't know what the solution is, they just know they have a problem. But that's okay, because in phase 2, we can bucket all the ideas into types of groups. K through 12 ideas, higher education ideas, housing instability ideas, food insecurity, childcare, et cetera, et cetera. And we can connect those ideas to those 105 buckets of capital, as well as other buckets of capital that are out there, right? The potentially $3 billion that the state will get through the infrastructure package, the 5 to 7 or so billion that the state would get through the reconciliation or social infrastructure package, right? And to the state infrastructure bank, which thanks to Senator Gochia and others, we were able to get funded for the first time ever, that allows us to do economic development capital projects. We also have the ability to simply identify something and realize, gosh, we don't have money for this out of all this. It's not eligible. But then we can hand it over to the legislature and say, hey, here's what the community said they needed. And then they can make a decision. It's a long way around saying, this is a big process. It's going to be a process. It's going to take time, longer than it typically takes for the state to spend money, but we needed to make sure it was as inclusive as humanly possible. We need to make sure that we talked to mayors all around our state to make sure that, while you have full control over your dollars through the council and we have full control over our dollars through the legislature, that it was collaborative, right? That we put one broadband plan together for the entire state as opposed to 30. Okay, with that, happy to take any questions as to process, but what I'd really like to get into is for me to stop talking, and I can tell you my team would very much like me to stop talking, and move on to what we can do to make your community better. How can we build the Nevada you deserve? Any questions as to process? Otherwise, let's turn over the floor. And Scott is there with a mic, and he will chase you down.
Are you taking concepts and ideas?
I'm taking anything, Senator. What do you got?
Thank you, Zach. It's a pleasure to be here in Elko this evening, and I just wanted to, I've got to get back to the shop and get my phone out of hock, otherwise I will really be handicapped by 7, so I'm going to open this up. But, over the last decade, I've brought a couple of pieces of legislation forward pertaining to the Elko Airport and the commercial airline flight we need in Eastern Nevada, and I'm speaking more on behalf of Eastern Nevada. Again, we passed 2 pieces of legislation to address small hub airports, and yet we've never been able to come up with the funding. This is an opportunity to put the money where we need it, and let's talk realistically. We've got we've got an airport that's manned, we've got a terminal, we've got a control tower, and we've got flights going one way. Folks, there's a lot left in Nevada. We need flights from here to Reno, here to Vegas. Let's tie Eastern Nevada into the state. And like I say, I brought Assembly Bill 112, and I think it was 107 in the Senate. Both of them passed, but we never could fund them. I'm asking you to fund them.
Thanks, Senator. I appreciate that. And so what the senator is going to do, right, to make sure that we have the right seat to sail all the way through and where it's going to go is he's going to go on NevadaRecovers.com. He's going to fill that out, and then we're going to make sure that we've got the data and can figure out what it's going to cost and how we go from here. Thanks, Senator.
Hi, I'm Terry Clark. I work at the hospital, and I also am communication director for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. One of the things that we are seeing in both when I wear either hat, is the behavioral health crisis in rural areas in particular. Suicidal ideation, the statistics of the hospital and the emergency department, and then the other statistics, those that go unreported until they actually complete it, and that's really sad. So what I would like to suggest is not just investing in the clinical infrastructure and the clinical services in rural areas for behavioral health and mental health, but also invest in helping those nonprofits and faith-based leaders and congregations be trained. When someone goes and gets inpatient, they're let go, they go to the, even if they have outpatient an appointment, they go to the appointment and then they go home. Well, they show up in the pastor's office or in the bishop's office or in the, just talking to their friends at church or whoever are at the nonprofits. And a lot of these people need support knowing how do we handle this and what resources can be developed for faith communities to help with this crisis. So that would be a suggestion.
Thank you. Other ideas? I'm going to start calling on people. Senator knows I will. Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry.
I don't need this, do I? Y'all can hear me?
They ought to be able to hear me too then.
Thanks.
How about Highway 93?
Okay, tell me.
Needs to be widened really bad, and maybe they just put some passing lanes in this year. That's
Between where and where?
from Wells to Jackpot would be good. From, it's not my deal, but from Lund South would be good.
Okay.
Or even probably Lund North. I don't remember, it's been a long time since I've been down that way.
It's all too late, buddy.
It's all good.
But it needs, there's some places where it's
Where
two
from?
lane, from Loggies to Curry,
You should get stuff.
but it's pretty nice road. It's been widened probably 5 feet on each side.
Okay.
And that just helps a lot. That gives people, there's places north there where it's, I don't know what the minimum width is of that road, but it's that.
Yeah.
And from there, it's straight off. 20, 30 feet, no guardrails, nothing. And I'll bet you I can think of 3 different spots, quarter-mile long, that's like that. And so that's just those 3 spots.
Okay.
I know there's more.
Well, that's perfect. So that's a great thing to put through the form. Now, one of the things you're going to hear, of course, is that ARPA dollars are primarily around fixing conditions that were either exacerbated or caused by the pandemic. However, there's another, like I mentioned, $3 billion worth of infrastructure coming in. And one of the things the state's trying to do through this process, just to be as frank as humanly possible, is that historically we are not prepared for money to show up, right? Because when there's a downturn, the first thing we do is we get rid of the people who are planning for 10 years in the future because we got to deal with the right now, right? I mean, that's the sort of budget decisions they got to make in the legislature, and they're hard ones. What we are trying to do is resource ourselves so that we have a great understanding, at least at this moment, of needs all around the state, whether they're transportation, mental health, or other, so that as buckets of funding become available, we can attach that funding with that idea and get stuff done. What we don't want to be in a situation of is $3 billion coming from an infrastructure bill, and we're all looking at each other in Carson City saying, okay, I guess we'll just do the next couple of projects on Ndot's list, right? That's a choice, but I think we can do better. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, the governor could kick a little of their transportation money and also.
Yeah, right.
Thank you. Kind of along the lines of infrastructure, I'm from Spring Creek Association. We only have one way in, one way out. We're about 16,000 plus people in the association in the valley area, if you included jigs and on down. So if there's anything that goes wrong with the highway, which we've had, the Memorial Highway, we have had in the past various situations where we've trapped people in that valley. And no medical services, very minimal now that we have a quick care area there, but from a health standpoint, again, we would not be able to get to our hospital. So we're looking at alternate sources, alternate routes for an evacuation route. Additionally, our infrastructures from the internet to the gas line, we have Nevada Energy and other gas lines going in that direction. But currently the legislature was even debating whether or not to get rid of natural gas, which was critical for us because we're just starting to get those infrastructures. So I hope that they would consider not taking away some of the infrastructures that we need.
I think the bill you're referring to, which was a study looking long-term and going nowhere, right?
I voted no.
Yeah. Figured I'd give you that later.
Hey there, Del Andriozzi with Elko County, and everybody stole all mine already, but I think there's an opportunity, like we were talking about. You know, I think the thing that we've seen is that we are all single source economy. You know, here we're natural resource based, and then we have the tourism sector in Elko County. You know, we have Jackpot and West Windover, and not unlike other places in Nevada, we're heavily impacted by the pandemic. So I think coming up with things to help diversify our economy. We got a lot of great space here. You know, we do have a lot of natural resources, and that also brings me back to the other single piece that we have is the fires have been so decimating to us, and what, you know, I mean, I think about everything we can. We need to make sure that we hang on to the economies that we have, and we don't lose those. So we don't want to threaten mining or gaming or any of those other industries that we have. We need to make sure that we support and strengthen those and eliminate those impediments that are threats to them. But at the same time, we need to find other forms of economy that we can bring in here. You know, I mean, why can't we generate our own power and put that back into the grid? I mean, that could be something that we could do, that we could actually create power and put that back in the grid. And that would be a sustainable, you know, a return on the investment, I guess is really what I'm trying to get at. Is we can do something, but if we can continue to get a return on that investment, we're all going to prosper, not in the short term, but for the long haul.
Yeah. I appreciate that, Del, because as the state's chief investment officer, really all I think about is how we're going to have more money in the future. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. Ma'am.
Thank you. I'm Pat Waits, actually I'm from Lander County. But one of my concerns that I wanted to bring up, and you gave, actually it's a choice of one of our answers, versus modernizing state government services. And I know the pandemic has identified some big areas that we want to improve on. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up was our state water engineer's office. And whenever we want to look up something, nothing is digitalized at all. We actually have to physically go to the office to look up things. And I can't believe in this day and age that we don't have things on the internet for us. And when I talked to some of them about that, they said, well, of course we're understaffed, and we have been understaffed, and we've identified, you know, like 58 basins that we're going to try to work on, but we don't have the people to do it, etc. So I'm going, I think we need to really look at this office. It definitely not only needs modernizing, but it is antiquated. I can't believe that compared to where Nevada really is and where we've been coming from. So that's one that definitely needs some looking at. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Pat, was it?
Pat?
Pat, yeah. So perfect thing to put into NevadaRecovers.com, because I'll tell you, we've had, 40 odd meetings, right? And that's the first time we've heard about that system, right? So this is me counting on you to go to NevadaRecovers.com and submit it so that we make sure it gets captured in that process. You know, we hear about a lot of other systems, right? We've heard about our tax system, certainly. We've heard about, well, the obvious one, of course, is the unemployment insurance system. Now, that system, thanks to the ledge, is going to get replaced. They made that decision. We didn't need to have 75 meetings in 75 places to know that the UI system failed Nevadans and needed to be replaced, right? It's about a 20-year-old system. And so that's going to get done. But other systems like that, straight up the middle for what we're trying to do. So thank you, Pat. Count on you to put that forward. I'm waiting for a nod. Not moving. She's going to nod. She nodded. Okay. Next. Sir.
All right. Thanks, Zach. Reese Keener from the city of Elko. You've heard a lot of infrastructure requests, and I think it's important for the folks in Carson City to remember that we are a bedroom community here to the mining industry, and so our friends in Lander County and Eureka County get the benefit of all the net proceeds, and so we're left with having to support infrastructure that in many cases we can't afford. And so one of the things, as was mentioned by Annette Kerr from the Spring Creek Association, secondary access out to Spring Creek. One such path would be the Eric Hart Boulevard, doing a bypass there, which would come, it would allow traffic to not have to go through downtown Elko, and it would move it around by the hospital up on Memorial Highway, and that would also provide a secondary access to the hospital, because there have been times to where there's been accidents on the Memorial Highway and emergency vehicles have not been able to get through. So that would be a biggie to be able to accomplish that. And again, I really agree with what Pete said about air travel. It'd be awesome to have some secondary carriers in here. We're held captive right now. We're very grateful to have them, but it'd be great to have another choice there as well with other routes. And I know that Curtis and Jan from the city both have a few other things to mention. When it comes to transportation, another need also is for the 12th Street Bridge, widening on that, just so there can be additional travel lanes. Just a tremendous amount of traffic moves through there. And I'll hand the mic over to Jan and Curtis if they're ready to go on their list.
Thank you, Mayor.
I'm Jan with the City of Elko. I don't really have a list, but the main thing on my mind is there are vendors in town working on the broadband, but help from the state would certainly help. I was just at the Nevada League of Cities, and they kept mentioning that with the ARPA funding, broadband is allowed, but you should wait until you get the infrastructure money. So, and I also understand that the state has a part, the city has a part, the vendor has a part, and maybe you can get into that a little bit, but yeah, broadband and cell service in northeastern Nevada leaves a little bit to be desired, for sure.
Absolutely, a thing I'm reminded of every time I make that drive.
Yeah, I knew that was a no-brainer.
Yeah. So here's the plan on broadband in a broad sense, right? So there are dollars in the American Rescue Plan Act that are specifically for broadband that came in at the state level. There are dollars in the infrastructure bill as currently written. It's Washington. Things can change. But as currently written, that are very specifically for broadband. And there's a commitment from the White House and others to make sure that everybody in the United States has access to broadband. Now, we know that the solution is a little bit different for the communities in, say, North Las Vegas who don't have access than it is for the communities out here, than it is for our friends at like the Walker River Potty Trail, right? There's a different solution in different places. But where the state's commitment is we're going to make sure that all those solutions happen. What we need help from on a city and county level is to help make sure that whatever the state plan is, actually the rubber meets the road, right? And so OSIT, which is the Office of Science and Innovation Technologies, I always get the eye roll. But OSIT at the state level has a full plan for broadband, soup to nuts. And they've been going through and mapping the different sources of federal funding to how it would work. We're also making sure that we collaborate with Nevada Gold Mines and others who are thankfully going and doing some of that work in our communities, right? So we want to make sure that it's a perfect collaboration, or at least as good as we can get. The government work between the state, the federal dollars coming in, the state dollars that are controlled there, as well as what's happening at the city and county level. That's going to take a fair amount of coordination. Our request from a state or from a county, city, and non-entitlement unit standpoint is so our ask there is, let's all get together, especially once we know what the deal is with those infrastructure dollars, and make a plan. The other thing that's just kind of a functional one is we don't have enough workers statewide to do this sort of broadband work. And if every community is trying to do their projects at the same time, it will drive up the cost pretty significantly. We've seen that in housing in a few other areas, so we really want to make sure that we are strategic about how that problem gets solved. But broadband, the three things we hear the most, just so everybody knows, are, and not in this order, broadband, affordable housing, and childcare. Those are the three biggies. Mental health is probably a close one. So,
Yeah, I was gonna say mental health is,
thank you, Jim.
there's not a lot of resources in Elko for sure.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. Is that we don't have the staff, we don't have the facilities, we don't have either.
Yes.
We get.
I think, yeah, I would say both.
Yeah, a few things specific to the state. Curtis Caller, City of Elko. We would like the state to explore relocating the Ndot maintenance facility that sits in the middle of Elko. That's also something that's been tried at the legislature for years and never been able to get through. The logical location for it would be out at state-owned land by NYTC, get it out of the middle of town. Another thing that would be nice, and it'd be more of a short-term fix, would be expand DMV services in Elko. To this day, if you go to DMV on any given day, you're there 2.5, 3 hours in the middle of a pandemic with a lobby that's packed full of people. I don't know if that's a real productive use of everyone's time and energy. So, and I'm sure that happens in other communities as well.
Yeah.
But and it could be due to staffing shortages or building size. I'm not sure, but that's something that
It's the former for the most part. So DMV is down. I don't want to hazard a guess as to the number of FTEs, but pretty significantly, and had a lot of people who moved on post the pandemic or haven't returned for whatever. Sorry, we're still in the pandemic. Post the sort of surge, like when people got back to work, they just didn't come back, right? So that's a DMV problem everywhere. But we think through systems and through trying to increase replacement and retention, we can fix it. But it is assuredly a problem everywhere, and definitely one that needs talking about a lot.
And then one of the other things is probably more of an infrastructure item, but the replacement, rehabilitation of the interlocal geothermal user group loop that serves multiple public agencies, Elko County School District, Great Basin College, ECBA, City of Elko, all utilize that, and that needs a full and complete replacement, and it will be very expensive, but it's a sustainable project and has a very successful track record. So that would be something on the infrastructure side that we would like to see.
Awesome. Thank you, Curtis.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Jeff,
Well, I kind of forgot where I was at. I'm in Elko. Well, I don't represent Elko, so I'm kind of looking over my shoulder, you know.
That's right. I'll let you know if somebody's coming at you.
Okay. So Highway 93,
Okay.
I don't want to go necessarily shop in Twin, but I want that truck traffic off of 84 coming down through Nevada. We send so many vehicles on 84 and then down 15, and they're all coming to Vegas. Why are we letting all those vehicles go through Utah? When we could have all those vehicles, which would make Wells and Ely jackpot. It would really increase all of those towns' income. Now, so the DMV, you can drive to Ely, do your stuff, and come back quicker than to go to the Elko DMV. Just wanted to say that.
I believe it. Try being in West Wendover, right? I mean, how many times we talked about that?
I'm on the Elko County
County Commission, so I represent, and I don't know, are you going to Wendover?
We are.
Jack?
West Wendover, I don't set foot in Wendover.
Okay, okay.
We're there tomorrow night.
I forget that there's a Wendover and a West Wendover.
Yeah, we don't talk about it.
Are you going to Jackpot?
We are not going to Jackpot on this trip, on the next one.
Okay, so I represent Wendover, but if you guys are going there, they will tell you that Corona has doubled their expenses on construction of a couple projects. So is that something that is included?
It could be. And I mean, this is one of the big takeaways from this is when you're thinking about ideas and what should be submitted, the only filter should be, is this something my community needs, period, right? Because the eligibility and the rules, and I'll look at the city folk, because I know you all have read this and know how kind of ridiculous it all is. You might have read them as well. Just on that one bucket, that $2.7 million, there's 150 pages of interim final rules, okay? And then there's 40 pages of FAQs that have been amended 12 times since they were released on May 17th. The point being, maybe, right? And so we want to collect the ideas and the need, and then we can figure out, and when I say we, I mean a team of lawyers, can figure out what is eligible and how it's eligible. But it's easier to collect the ideas first than to try to tell everybody what the rules are, because the rules keep changing, right? I mean, we had a additional piece of Treasury guidance that hit us between Battle Mountain and Elko, right? So we just need to know about the ideas, and then we can work to resource them. Because we have the ideas, that's the part that only you can give us. The legal part, we can pay that down.
So, okay.
So all ideas.
I just want to reiterate, Highway 93 traffic. There are so many trucks now just coming out of Twin, so I don't know if it makes sense, but if you look at the traffic on I-15 over in Salt Lake, and our traffic has doubled because of that truck traffic out of Twin Falls. But we could have a lot more if the road, the snowbirds won't come down 93, because for us old people, it's difficult to drive on that tight of a road. They like to have more room.
Well,
But anyway.
No, I appreciate it. And here's the best thing about this. I'm not the one who's going to make a decision as to whether or not that's a good idea or a bad idea, whether or not that falls within guidance for the ROI. We're going to have experts who can do that work, right? So we'll have traffic experts, we'll have transportation experts who can look at it and say, oh, okay, we can leverage this kind of capital, or we can't, right? This makes sense or it doesn't. That's the best part about it. We are gathering information, we are listening and directing people as much as we can to, one more time, NevadaRecovers.com. And then we can resource those ideas later on.
I'll get off of here, but I'm gonna put stuff for Jackpot on NevadaRecovers.com.
Good, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Shirley Allen Kellerman, I'm just a citizen, been born and raised here. In your first speech, you said that there's transparency. I want to know where there's accountability so that we know how and where these funds are spent. Because that's the problem with the government right now, is there is no accountability for all these funds being spent.
Yeah, great question, Shirley. So every idea that comes in through NevadaRecovers.com will be visible on the website. You're going to be able to look at it, all the ideas. And then all the places the money goes are going to be right next to it. So you can see, here's where the money came in, here's where the idea was, here's where the money went. That's it. All we do is give every little piece of information we've got, which is simply every piece of information.
Is that the total state?
Entire state. Every
And
dollar
all the
we've got.
funding at the state?
All the funding for the state is currently available on the governor's finance office website. That's than the Coronavirus Relief Fund dollars, the CARES Act dollars, which came in, and the state had a little bit more control over those, right? So they adjusted it so there would be more localized control. That's step one. Step two, the bill speaks to the types of things that we're supposed to prioritize. We're supposed to prioritize communities that were hard hit by the pandemic, whether that was loss of life or economic loss. We're supposed to prioritize communities that have less per capita, which is typically done by qualified census tracts, right, which is a level of poverty within a community, right? So there's additional flexibility for those dollars. But to speak frankly, there's 73% or so of the population lives in Clark County, and I expect about 73% of the money is going to end up in Clark County. Could be a little more, could be a little less. But that's the way we're thinking about it, is simply going where the ROI is greatest for Nevada, where that return on investment that somebody, yes, thank you, Dell, right? No. Yeah. Where the ROI is greatest for Nevada. That's where the focus is going to be. Some of those projects are going to be in Clark County, some of those projects are going to be in Waco. I expect it to be pretty proportionate to population.
And so with the new mining tax, those funds that are going into the educational system for the state,
Yep.
how is that going to be provided? How's that going to be, is it going to be done the same way?
Yeah, so I think we might be getting a little far afield here, but there's two things that are provided here, right? We've got the new education funding formula, which I can try to explain, but we'd be here all night. I probably wouldn't do a great job. That's not something we do in the Treasury. And that $200 million that the mining community asked us to pass, right? Because there were other more egregious, at least from a mining perspective, taxes on the table. That money's going into the education account, the master education account, and then gets distributed as part of the per pupil funding formula, which, again, if I tried to describe, I wouldn't do a great job. But it goes through that process. That just gets added into the pot for education funding. Yes, please.
Basically, one of the things that we ran into during the pandemic, again in Edker, was that a lot of the small businesses were struggling because of the shutdowns. And therefore, I was hoping that there would be some sort of new incentive plans for small business startups, not just recovering of businesses, but some new startups, because a lot of people did lose their jobs or were not able to continue on their jobs unless they worked at home. And of course, our internet here, it didn't allow for people to be at home because if their child was on the internet trying to go to school, so under consideration is that as well, obviously, is the internet. I'm sure that's a very key one. But we had a lot of kids that weren't able to participate in education online because of our internet services. But I think there needs to be a small business startup, whether it be in the county or in the cities, the incorporated cities. I think some sort of incentive program. Along those lines, not so much with the pandemic, but during our fires, we had to help ranchers. They did not become eligible for grant funding because of the way the bills were written for farmers versus in FEMA versus with rebuilding fences for ranching. And so I think we need to take a look at some of the eligibility of some of these programs for our ranchers as well, because they do supply the beef for our industries, grazing, et cetera, like that. And I think a lot of that from the way the bills are written and the ordinances were written were more for farmers Midwest versus the Western ranchers.
100% sure. And so when we look at, I'll take the second one first and then the first one, because the second one I get to completely shirk responsibility, so I'll start there. Our federal delegation, that's exactly the kind of thing that they need to know about, because we've been talking, and I'm sure this has been passed on, but when we talk to Senator Cortez Masto, Senator Rosen, they're always asking, how do we shift language that's been in bills usually for a long time to make them more effective for Nevada? One of the things your Congressman, Mr. Amadei, was able to get done is he adjusted some of the language around PPP loans to make sure that smaller gaming establishments like the ones that you find out here were able to apply, right? And that made a big difference for a lot of those businesses. We've got a little bit of experience going back to the first one on small business grant programs. Our office ran a program, when I say our office, I mean myself, Eric, and two other people ran a program called PETS, which is the Pandemic Emergency Technical Support Grant Program, largest small business grant program in the history of the state, about $100 million, ran with 4 people. So when you ask about government accountability, that's one of the ways we're trying to save money, sure. But that program, which was able to help businesses in the city of Elko, county Elko, and all around the state, was put together quickly because we only had a certain amount of time to spend the money. in April of 2020, and the rule said we had to spend it by December 31st of 2020, right? Anybody who's with the city or the county or anything else knows how difficult it is to spin up programs in that period of time. With this money, we've got a little bit more time. For the most part, it needs to be allocated by December 31st of 2024 and spent by December 31st of 2026. So for instance, if you realize you're going to build a building or widen a road, that work doesn't have to happen by the end of 24, but you need to know that's where you're going to spend the money. That gives us time to be intentional, which is important. It also gives us time to look at ways that we can try to make this funding a little bit more systemic, right? That it can fix a problem and then keep that problem fixed. You give grant dollars to a startup once or to a business once, it helps that business, but then it goes away, right? You get that kind of immediate impact, and then it's... So what we're looking at is ways that we can use the money to start up revolving loan funds, right? Low or no interest funds for small businesses or for other endeavors, affordable housing, right? Other things we all care about, so that that money can cycle through. We've had some success doing it at the state and federal level in things like water programs, transportation programs, right? But the trick is making sure that the programs are accessible enough, right? That we don't create so much paperwork that a small business, and we know how difficult it is for small businesses to get started. I've started a few myself. Thank you, Scott. We need to make sure that the paperwork is easy enough for them to get, but also robust enough that we are using the money appropriately. But those are two great ideas that should go to where, everybody? All right, thank you, Madeline, from the governor's office, who is always a team player. Other ideas, other hopes. I'm gonna start calling on people, and I'm definitely gonna call on you. Just want you to know. I'm very quiet. Sir, how can we build a Nevada user? Yeah.
Well, I actually just want to comment on something that you said. You made a comment that the mining industry asked to have a tax passed. I would just argue that that's like saying that someone is threatening to cut off your arm, and you say, please, please, can you just cut off my pinky instead? And then the attacker saying, you asked us to cut off your pinky. I don't think we wanted that tax. I don't think that tax was something that we would have ever invited. It was the least bad of any of the ones that were offered.
Okay, appreciate it. Ma'am?
I'm Katie Denrup. I'm the Executive Director of the Elko Convention and Visitors Authority. I'll go to your website. I've filled out your form. What I'm hearing from our stakeholders for tourism here, our lodging tax dollars are outperforming pre-pandemic numbers. They need employees. We need to incent people to work, and we need to stop incenting people not to work. I cut 4 positions. The way my organization is structured, I'm not eligible for any of this unless I go beg from the city and the county or the state. I wasn't eligible for PPP until round 2, which we got. I had to sell it to my lender because they didn't know what was going on. I got 2 positions added, 3 positions added back to my budget this year. I have 0 applicants. People aren't incented to work. And we need to stop incenting people to sit at home. I see all the retraining. Great Basin College has mastered training people and distance learning. So that opportunity is out there if people want it and they go after it. Right now, there's no reason for people to go to work. And we need to give people a reason to go to work. And I will tell you, in this community, I've lived here for over 21 years now. The mining industry steps up. They're expanding childcare opportunities. They're supporting the education system. They've always supported the education system here. So our community is stepping up to provide the resources that people need so that people can go to work. We need to give people a reason to go to work.
Thank you. So one of the things we're hearing a lot about is workforce. And I think everyone that I've talked to, or the experts in space, said there's really 3 reasons why people aren't going to work right now. Now, one of those reasons is the federal government coming in with FPUC, the Federal Unemployment Compensation, an additional $300 a week. That goes away quickly see. Now, we've seen in other states that have gotten rid of it, they haven't actually had a tick up in employment because of the second problem, and I think the problem that we hear about the most on the tour, which is childcare, right? We have a childcare problem. In areas where childcare is available, it is too expensive. In areas where it's not available, it doesn't matter how much it costs because you can't find it. Right? I got 3 kids under 7. We have trouble finding it in Las Vegas. Childcare is a problem. And so in this bill, 2 things happen. $200 million that's going to be put out to help childcare providers and people who already have childcare to pay for it. Right? That's great. But that's not the only problem in Nevada. In Nevada, our problem is we don't actually have the facilities. So it's not getting a credit to pay for childcare when there aren't any spaces at the childcare doesn't solve that problem. We're appreciative of mining, certainly for stepping up, and other communities like gaming for stepping up and helping to fix that in their specific areas or for their employees. But we know that one of the items, and certainly an item I've suggested everybody put in, is childcare facilities. And what specifically the community needs is it's a different solution in different communities, and we don't think a blanket, everybody gets a new childcare facility is actually the way to solve the problem. It's going to be different in different places. The third issue, and I don't know if you've run into this a little bit, but certainly we have at the state, is that the pandemic, I don't want to get too off topic, but I think it's interesting. Well, the pandemic created this sort of shift in people, where you were doing something every day. You were going into an office and going to the same job. You were cleaning rooms, you were bussing tables, you were doing something over and over and over again. And you had been doing that for almost your entire career, right? And then you had to stop. Because of lockdowns, because of COVID, because of lack of business volume, because of whatever. You had to stop, and you had to take a moment to sort of reevaluate, is this how I want to spend my life? And that has led to what they're calling the Great Resignation, right? Just thousands of people saying, gosh, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to do something else. And that's where sport, like you were saying, Annette, setting up small business assistance and starting up small business becomes so important because people want to do something different with their lives. We need to give them opportunities to, right? Training opportunities are available, but people need to pay for them, right? And so we got to figure out ways that we can do that so that we can connect people with jobs. Because it's not just that folks are getting paid to stay at home. It's not just that they don't have childcare. In some cases, they don't want to do that job anymore. They want to do a different job. Not because the first job was bad, but because they've been doing it. And they had to stop. And they thought different. Anyway, I can't solve the third one. We can figure out childcare. And the first one goes away in like 4 days. So, other questions, other ideas? You know what's coming to you, man.
You've got to volunteer.
Oh, it's a volunteer. All right, off the hook for a second, but it's coming.
Leslie Creel, Elko County resident and trail advocate over the last year. It feels pale in comparison next to mental health and childcare, but it does address some of the mental health. Trail systems would be, promoting our trail systems in Elko County would be great, and we have some momentum on that where we could plug dollars into it pretty quickly. It could also even address potentially Annette's concern over access, secondary access to Spring Creek. One of the trail connections that we've been working on is on Ndot right away, and Ndot basically says it's what they would put on there for a bike path is pretty much a road. So if we worked with Ndot a little bit more, maybe it would become an emergency vehicle access at least, or an emergency lane access. So it'd be a connection between Elko and Spring Creek. There's about 5 miles of development there for a bike pathway, which would also double in
It's a great fire break.
Yes, and another fire break. Yeah. So, and it does, Dalmo's comment about community development, about diversity in the community. We had so much traffic up in the canyon this year, and it's all empirical numbers. I don't know that we have any numbers on it, but I just saw so many people up on the trails, and last year particularly, but this year as well. And there's been a lot of pressure, and some of the people in the mall are, complaining about the pressure there. Just developing some more trail systems that off of that, and closer to town that people can use more on their lunch hour. We have We have 50 miles of planned single track out there that we just need to build. We just need the dollars to do it, basically. So I don't think it, it applies directly to what you, perhaps when the infrastructure money comes through, but I do think it would make Elko more attractive for people who don't want to be stuck in, Elko, and that's why they aren't here. I think we can develop a culture of recreation opportunity outside of hunting that could be attractive for the workforce as well. So.
Leslie, right?
Yes.
Thank you for that idea, but I do have to correct you. All of these ideas are important, and because we have so many different buckets of funding coming into the state, there are some ideas that are going to be the only idea in that bucket of funding, and therefore can get done because of it, right? And so that's why it's so important to get every idea that we possibly can, because, like I said, there's just a lot of different ways that we can possibly get it. So thank you for that, Leslie. I appreciate it. Sir? I thought you were like reaching for the mic. You wanted to. I'm here to help you.
I'm Sheldon Hetzel with Bailey Homes.
Good to see you, Sheldon.
We build homes from Incline Village to Wendover, so we're across the northern part of the state. I would echo certainly a lot of the things that have been discussed in terms of infrastructure particularly. We run into a lot of that, and I would also add to that just the traditional infrastructure. When we come to bring projects to bear, we struggle with be it water or sewer or whatnot, where we've got dilapidated systems that need upgrade and improvement. This might be an opportunity to actually give something that generations ahead of us would be able to benefit from. So I would be mindful of that. And then more to the point of what COVID has done to the building industry, supply chain issues are just out of control. The number of price increases I get daily are beyond our ability to even tabulate almost. And trying to understand, when you talk about affordable housing, I used to think of that in terms of a sector of the population that maybe had an issue with regard to what their pay scale was and what was affordable. Now, this is becoming a broad spectrum event, and we watch folks coming into our offices with cash coming in from California and Oregon and Washington, and they're setting a new standard at the price level, and supply chain's also driving that price level up to where you have local folks that children have been raised in this community, and now they have absolutely no opportunity to come in and buy a home anymore or start a family without getting into some kind of apartment or lesser facility, and I think that's going to become a crisis before too long as far as where we're going to house all these folks that can no longer get into homes. And just to kind of quantify that a little bit, to give you a couple of points of data there, homes that we were literally selling last year for $250,000 are now, we struggle to honestly make money out of that home at $350,000. If it was a home selling at $300,000 to $350,000, it's now selling for $550,000. And that's price increases. The supply chain, we can't get the material, and we never know what it's going to cost once it comes in. And I don't have the answer as to how the funding could help with that solution, but it's definitely COVID related, as our plants have been socially distanced within the plants. It's slowed down production. It has it's caused these things to get more difficult in getting them to where they're needed, and it's definitely driving prices. And that's not that I speak to the housing industry, but I heard from talking about ranching. I happen to do that as well. I mean, you can't get hay at a reasonable rate, so there are cattle that are being slaughtered. The auctions are being shut down because the price is so low that the auctioneer just won't even sell them for those prices. So there's some real cost increases that have kind of gotten out of control that I think are starting to reach broad sectors of folks, and maybe there's some help in those.
You're absolutely right, and I would argue we're in a housing crisis right now. We've probably been in a housing crisis for about 18 months. Before that was just a housing emergency. One of the things that we know we're going to be able to do through the infrastructure bill and through the infrastructure bank, and that we've been trying to work on at the state level, is to create, to remove friction points in housing. Now, some of those are local issues, right? They're like ways that we can supply side, there was a good 2-month period where every day the governor and I were looking at the spot price a lot, right? Because we had some affordable housing projects where lumber got so expensive that they switched to steel. They re-engineered a 2-story building to be steel, which for anybody who's never done that is really weird, right? That was like a really weird moment. And we're seeing it go all the way through the process. I think 2 things that we can do at the state level to support that. One is the creation of inland ports, right, to make sure that we have more direct access to the supply chain a little earlier on in the process. We aren't as dependent on what's coming through California, right? So we've got to get it off the boat, get it here, and get it into our communities. And number 2 is we've got to figure out other ways to build affordable housing, right? And to your point, affordable housing being housing that anyone can afford, not simply housing that's income restricted. But absolutely right. What's the biggest impediment right now outside of cost to build? Is it water and sewer out where because you're one of the few builders who builds in this area?
Yeah, and definitely, like I said, traditional infrastructure. So whether it's there being water rights available, which can become an issue, and sometimes that's a monetary issue.
Yeah.
Just being able to afford to purchase those water rights, or it's an infrastructure issue. So you have cities, and this happens across northern Nevada, but you have cities that have certain limited budgets, and they know and feel the pressure. I'm sure we could talk to Elko City here that would concur that they feel that pressure to need to expand the infrastructure to be able to service infill opportunities within the city. But budgetary constraints are such that just becomes out of reach. There's certain projects I know we've been talking about for a decade that they've been out of reach for a long, long time. And yet those kind of things definitely drive costs up when it comes to housing. So that could be helpful to drive that.
I appreciate that, Sheldon. I mean, one of the things that when we put, Senator Gochi is not here, but I'd give him credit for this. When we put the state infrastructure bank together and started figuring out how to fund it, one of the reasons was to get to that last 100, 250 feet of infrastructure, right? To move that water from one side of the street to the other side where it just does not pencil for the developer to do it, but it obviously needs to be done for the development to happen. So hopefully we can use that tool plus some of these infrastructure dollars that are coming in to make a bite there. What we're going to need your help is identifying the most effective ways to do that, because it shouldn't be functionally, right? It's not going to be the governor and I being like, oh, this will really help those builders. So we're trying to avoid that, which is where we need your voice. Okay, so thank you for being here.
My name is Osborne. I work with Elko County. One of the things that we haven't talked about yet, which really has been brought to light by the pandemic itself, is the lack of public health infrastructure. I know it's not a popular topic, specifically related to the pandemic, but it is definitely something that we need here in Elko. We started the conversations with the state prior to the pandemic, and so I don't want to belabor that point, and we'll certainly circle back with you all, but that is definitely something that we need outside of COVID, whether it's mental health resources, whether it's family planning, whether it's immunizations for childhood immunizations, all of those things. I've had the pleasure to work right alongside with Dr. Putnam from the very beginning, so I feel like I've lived and breathed this with him this entire time, so I can definitely attest that that's something that's needed here. And I have a team member here that wants to talk.
Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Hello, sir.
Hi, my name's Lee Cagness. I'm the emergency manager for Elko County. So one of the things that was in the state budget, the initial state budget that was actually modified at the beginning of COVID was infrastructure increases for the Nevada State radio system. So that Nevada State radio system, we rely upon here. Our sheriff's office uses it, our ambulance service uses it, highway patrol uses it, and it was years away from being completed when it got removed from the budget or delayed. And we're to the point now where we have old technology. I know that it is being upgraded, but I think we're looking at 2023 or 2025, somewhere in that timeline, to have that completed and actually rolled out here. We signed on to that plan many years ago before I ever got to Elko County, but it's state infrastructure. We pay Ndot for the use of the radios, but we were also just notified a few weeks ago that the state is out of the ID numbers, the LID numbers that will allow radios to function. So at this point in Elko County, our sheriff's office, ambulance service, anybody else that needs to use that system, if we wanted to add an additional resource, we're not going to be able to get a radio to communicate with our dispatch center. So I know that was in the initial budget, which is why I bring it up, that that's a thing that really needs in, and we rely upon it out here quite a bit. So for us, that would be critical infrastructure as far as communications, especially public safety.
So, Lee, right?
Yes, sir.
The perfect example of something to submit, right?
Okay.
Because even though it's in the budget and it's going to happen a couple of years from now, right? If we can move it up, right, and shift dollars to sooner rather than later, it's good use.
Right, and I guess the other thing is hospital communication. So all the rural hospitals, Northeast Nevada Regional Hospital, Battle Mountain General Hospital, all of those, that radio system also functions as your base contact for your hospital. So all of the rural services out here in this whole area, Eureka, White Pine, Lander County, and I believe Humboldt County, all use it to communicate with their base hospitals as well.
Thank you. See, I got a twofer there.
I'm like, Lee, you have to come talk because I don't know all the details.
Other ideas? Tara? Terry?
Yeah.
Terry.
This is a more of a it was less tangible, but I have noticed that especially in social media, there is so much attention on the negative, on dominating the posts and the feedback with the negativism and it's just, I want to use the word means, that is somewhat become mean in some cases. And yet our communities are filled with people who are genuine and serving and caring. These are good people. I am on the Community Foundation for Elko County KDS too. We see nonprofits doing amazing work. We see our services, Lee and his team, and our sheriffs, and our emergency response, and people are doing amazing things in this community, but we're not seeing enough. We're not hearing enough. I would love to see a unified campaign to promote the good that is happening and the way we're serving each other and caring for each other, and try to maybe raise that level of hope and inspiration that we can recover, we can do this, and we're already doing it. We just aren't hearing enough about that.
Thank you. Sir?
General statement, everybody has mentioned really good projects, but one thing you said earlier on, Zach, concerns me is you're talking about return on investment. And in rural Nevada, where we don't have the population density, that metric will always work against us.
Yep.
So the state needs to change their thinking and look at what we really need. And I've only been here 2.5 years, and infrastructure such as schools, other than Adobe and Spring Creek and high school, the rest of them are a disgrace and they should be replaced. So we need to go and sit down and look at infrastructure that needs to be put, and everyone's talking about the same thing. But we can't use return on investment as your primary driver, and you have to look at, particularly talking about humanity and being kind. And rural Nevada needs some kindness coming out of the state, not just numbers.
I appreciate that, and that's one of the reasons why we're here, right? I think the other thing to just sort of focus on is we know that certain parts of this are going to be more expensive in rural Nevada. I can assure you it is more expensive for Nevada to get broadband, every Nevadan in this room, than it is to get every Nevadan in like the center of Las Vegas, right? So there is a commitment from the state to make sure that we solve problems for everybody. When I say ROI, what I'm trying to mean is, what I am meaning, is a return on what helps Nevadans. Now we know, right, whether it's community development block grants or other sources of funding, some things are population-based, right? Because the money that came in, population rules on them. And that's more fair for some than it is for others. It's the nature of the beast, right? We can't do anything about that at the state level. But what we can do, what we do have, is a commitment to making sure that every Nevadan recovers from the pandemic. That's why we're out here. That's why it's called the more money to connect a couple of hundred people in some of our tribal communities to broadband than we spend to connect a couple of thousand people in our larger cities. Okay, right? And that's not a return on investment. These aren't, and this is important, I suppose. This isn't a computer figuring out where to spend this money. These are your legislators. This is the governor. This is myself. These are human beings, including people who are going to be hopefully part of that conversation in this room if they want to, trying to figure out the best way to do it, right? So we're going to use metrics. We're going to use data because at some point you have to, right? But we're also going to use a little bit of compassion. But I appreciate it. That's why we're here. I mean, literally, that's why we're here.
The city of Elko is going to be having a workshop next Thursday evening to gather input from the community on the allocation of our funding here locally. And so, I'm just curious, so we're doing this, as a state level. Will you consider some of the input